G'day guys, here we are again, 48 in 48. I'm going to document the journey. It's raising money for a great cause, Models for Heroes of course, and the kit I'll be building for the 48 in 48 is the M8, the Tamiya kit. I know it's not 48 scale, but people don't care these days. So let's get started and I will show you how I build this little fella.
Coffee before we teachy.
As mentioned, I'll be building the Tamiya M8 Greyhound, mainly because I assumed the kit would be one of those more achievable kits for a weekend challenge such as this. That was probably my first mistake. So what is the 48 in 48 build challenge? Well, the 48in48.org charity build challenge is a global event where modelers attempt to build a kit over a weekend while live streaming and engaging with the community. It's run through the Model Officers Mess, of which I'll leave a link down below. But most importantly, the annual event raises funds for Models for Heroes. Models for Heroes is a charity supporting veterans and first responders using scale modelling as therapy for PTSD, anxiety and isolation. It's as much about getting involved and participating than it is about finishing. However, as modelers, it can be a great way to help us actually complete something and help us identify inefficiencies in workflow and habits, and it encourages decision making over perfection, which can be surprisingly empowering at times. You've been watching me assemble the hull section as well as drill out the exhaust pipe with a micro drill. When working against the clock, it's crucial to break the model down into as many sub-assemblies as possible in order to expedite the painting and ensure the workflow is efficient. I still couldn't help myself but to sand the ejector pin marks on the inside of the turret, but unfortunately my weekend soon became filled with obsessing over things that probably wouldn't have even been seen on the finished model, but I guess old habits die hard. I picked myself up a metal barrel for this one as well, more of an attempt to avoid the need for cleaning seams. However, the plastic surgery required ensured that there'd probably be no time saving there anyway. Again, I'm in the can't help myself basket here, and I added additional texture to the turret by stippling Mr. Surfacer 500 over the surfaces using an old brush. Taking care, of course, not to damage any of those tie downs showing in the mouldings. This technique was also used to apply some texture over the exhaust pipe. I'd purposely left the firewall out of the interior to allow for easier masking. You may also notice I'd primed the interior sections white and used masking tape to define the sections that were to be painted in the olive drab, although I did later modify which sections were to get painted, as that driver's compartment floor should have also been olive drab. I'd upgraded the wheels to the DEF model resin set initially to speed up the build process. However, the sag in the wheels was worth the investment in my opinion. The wheels had been primed black and came with a paint mask in the set, which made spraying the olive drab to the centres a breeze. Painting a monotone scheme is always enjoyable for me because I get the opportunity to extend the colour using highlighting. AK make the initial round of highlighting, or in this case fading, easy with the olive drab faded colour. I apply that to the centres of the internal surfaces as well as the centres of the wheels to create some variation in the finish. The internal masking could then be removed, but a word of caution because this AK rattle can white primer reacts with this masking tape for some reason and holds the gum from the tape. I had this issue on a rally car model I built some time ago. Maybe test it if you are using it with your own models because it's really hard to clean off. Moving through the other sub-assemblies now, and the shells get a 50-50 mix of brass and super silver from SMS. That super silver brightens the brass up and gives it a little more shine, and the extinguisher was also painted in a red colour. The rubber parts of the wheels that were primed in black are settled down with a targeted application of, again, my favourite colour, dark sea grey, to give the element some dimension and bring it a little closer to the colour of a rubbery tyre. All the other bits and pieces had been held to a metal bar using double-sided tape and first sprayed in their base colours and then brush painted with the detail colours.
6 odd hours now, it's heading towards 2 o'clock in the morning. Lots of sub-assemblies, lots of painting and bits and pieces done, so hopefully tomorrow it's all going to start coming together. It's taking a little bit longer than I thought it would, surprisingly, but it's going well. Hopefully you can see that down there. So time for a bit of sleep and then I'll hit it again tomorrow.
Sleep, I need sleep.
The turret ring had also been sprayed in that white primer and the detail was brush painted as per the colour callouts in the instructions. I was later led to believe that that framework of that basket should have been left as white. It was then just a matter of piecing in all of those pre-painted elements together, taking care with the glue application so as not to damage the paintwork. A corner I really should have cut was the stowage bin underneath the radio. In the scheme of things, it was unlikely you'd even see it in the finished model, but I just couldn't let it go. So set about rolling a thin tarp using millipart superfine. Dusting the surface with talcum powder keeps the putty from sticking to the board and the D-size battery I'm using to roll it out. In no time at all, I was populating that bin with a tarp as the base, and then various ammunition cases and personal gear were populated in that area. I am notoriously bad for cleaning my airbrush. I never do it. And after unsuccessfully trying to do some shading in the interior, I just gave up and I had to break it down and thoroughly clean it. So that was 30 minutes out of this build I'd never get back, but I thought I'd mention it here because you can see some of the failed shading in the interior.
You disgust me.
Light chipping was applied using Tamiya dark iron and a ragged sponge. The Tamiya paint dries fast and tends to be stickier than acrylics can be, but that is a property I like when sponge chipping these paints. It helps with restraint and manages to keep the chips quite small and refined. The effect is then enhanced with a fine brush and silver acrylic paint across the ribs of the floor. The brush chipping gives me greater control than a sponge would have here, so that was the far better option for this location. Interiors would get extremely dirty, and the quickest way to create that effect is with pigments. The dried rubble pigment is placed around the edges and corners using a soft brush, and a sprinkle of seagrass clippings is also added into the mix. A soft brush loaded with pigment fixer that's thinned with white spirit is touched against the surface, and capillary action pulls the mix through the pigment, allowing that pigment to maintain its volume. Because the pigment fixer is an enamel based product, I'm able to reactivate it at any time and modify the finish, but once it's dry, it will firmly hold that pigment in place. I then apply a brown for Africa Corps vehicles as a wash through the interior to give the detail a bit of a lift, plus it will also work with those pigments to add variation in the finish. You really have to be patient with pigments though, because they will look vastly different once they dry. So you really have to trust the process and give it a try. As a general rule though, a little bit will go a very long way. The washes continue around the turret ring, and that can be then assembled, as was the roof of the hull. Although that driver's compartment is lacking much detail at all, I decided to pose it open and modified one of the grab handles with a piece of bent wire. It's a small detail, but it's a point of difference and something that might add a little bit of interest to the finished model. One of the things I like most about the Greyhound as a subject is the options it gives you with those wheel guards. These things had them, didn't have them, they kind of had them, and everything in between. Each option completely changes the look of the vehicle. I decided to fit the front guards because I wasn't building a specific vehicle and I just liked the look of them, and I left the rear ones off. The missing rear guards had clear holes in the side of the vehicle though, where hinges or bolts that help keep them in place were left off. So a micro drill was used to represent that detail, although I might revisit that later depending on how the weathering looks. If there was one thing guaranteed to slow down a build, it would have to be adding stowage to it. Fitting all the pieces around the model can be like playing a game of Tetris, and painting individual elements like this is incredibly time consuming. I experimented with using the Soul model pack of stowage, but I found it wasn't really that user friendly as I'd kind of hoped, and I moved to a set made by Legend, which was really impressive. Small strips of lead foil are also used to create straps for the packs that are hanging in place, helping give them a sense of realism and weight. To help integrate and build on the sculpts from the set, I went to that milliput again and created some more tarps and laid them over the main sculpt. This allows me to be able to add other elements and press them into the putty that will give them a bit of an impression of weight. And nothing worse than a floating heap of stowage, so a couple of pieces of solder wire can be twisted together to create a rope and then strung across the stowage to give the impression that it was tied down and held in place. As usual, the model was primed in Mr. Surfacer Black straight out of a rattle can, off screen, and almost immediately I could start applying my olive drab. I spoke about how I paint a colour like olive drab extensively in the M18 Hellcat build, so if you haven't seen it, maybe check it out, and I won't go into too much detail here, but I'll have to say painting olive drab is one of my absolute favourite colours. For me, it's exactly what a military vehicle should look like. For the highlights, I wanted to fast track and push it a little more rather than going straight for that faded olive drab that I'd used in the interior. So I added US interior yellow to the mix. The interior yellow should brighten things up and keep some vibrancy to the colour. Now, by keeping the paint thin to around 80% thinner to 20% paint, it should keep that paint mix translucent and help the darker base colour and the highlight colour tonally blend. I should have mentioned it, but pieces of sponge here you can notice have been stuffed into the cavities and make for a real quick and easy mask on a model like this. I then moved to the interior yellow by itself and apply that as an additional round of highlighting, focusing on the horizontal surfaces and the uppermost edges, but in a reserved way. And why the heck not? I throw some ivory in with that interior yellow, and I focus on hatches and some of the most obvious horizontal surfaces. For me, this is where the fun in the monotone finish really comes in. It's also important to understand that washes and weathering will darken this tone greatly, so I'd encourage you to be brave and try pushing the highlighting stage further than you think you can. Honestly, you'll be surprised just how far you can take it. A quick gloss coat using Mr. Super UV cut gloss from the rattle can, and soon after the decals can be applied. Now, I'm not making a specific vehicle here, so chose the ones I like the look of rather than worrying about any reference. Once in place, the model received an all-over VMS satin varnish to seal them in place. I'm using satin because that will better help hold paint and washes that will follow. Just like I did with the Hellcat in my last video series, I could then set about blocking in the stowage. This was done with around 5 or so different base tones: buff, light earth, splinter mustard base, and those sort of tones are my go-tos. But as long as the tones are somewhat military in the look, I think you'll find it acceptable. Painting with acrylics will always take multiple passes, however it dries very quickly, allowing the blocking in to move quite quickly. For the Hellcat stowage, I invested a lot of time creating highlights and varied tones over each of the elements, but I didn't have the luxury of time with this model. I flooded the area in an acrylic thinner, and then I could use the Quick Gen Dark Flesh to define some of the shapes within that stowage. By initially flooding the surface with the thinner, I'm creating a surface that allows the paint to run through the details and settle in place. The layer is acting as a wash, but also a bit of a filter, slightly shifting the overall tone of those stowage elements. And this is where I took a few shortcuts. A mix of buff and white are heavily thinned to around 85-90% thinner to paint, and carefully sprayed using my 0.2 Mobius from Gallery. Now the control I can get with applying these highlights to these various pieces of stowage is a good reminder for me I need to clean my airbrush more often, because I forgot just how tight I could spray with this airbrush. I'm focusing on the uppermost sections of the sculpt, areas where the light may catch, and then by adding a couple of drops of white to that mix, I make another round of passes over a smaller surface area than I did the previous layer. The same technique is used for the stowage elements that have the green tones to them, and I'm using an RAF Sky here as my highlight colour. It's a lot more clumsy than brush painting would be, but it is quick and gives the stowage a soft and voluminous feel. Ivory and basic skin tone can then be used to brush paint in the ropes and straps on some of the bedrolls. By using this lightened colour on elements like these, I can help lift them and highlight the detail over the parts, but it also allows the darker colours of the stowage to gain better definition and uniqueness. As a general rule, I try to layer the colours of my stowage from dark to light, the lowermost layers in the darker colours and the uppermost ones in the brighter colours. One of the most satisfying parts of painting olive drab, or for me at least, is seeing that dark brown pin wash go down. The depth in the colour instantly makes sense of all of those highlights and tonal variation I'd added earlier. It could also be used in a selective way over parts of the stowage to again add definition to the straps and the folds. And that is where my 48-hour challenge concluded. The wheels are held on with blue tack and the painting is a little unrefined, and I didn't get the weathering done. So from that point of view, I was a little disappointed. However, I was pretty satisfied with the progress I made over the space of a weekend. Plus, I had no one to blame but myself for choosing a build with a partial interior and then loading it up with a ton of stowage. That and the commitments of everyday life, and I freely admit I underestimated the time it would take to build this kit. In saying that, it's a pretty good place to wrap this video, and I'll lean into some of the more advanced techniques I'll use to weather it in the next one. This event is not really about finishing a model though, it's about participation and making a difference while connecting with a like-minded community and having some fun along the way. So from that point of view, the weekend was a resounding success. So be sure to join in yourself if you didn't participate in this one in around a year's time, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. But hey, if you guys took part in this one just gone, please comment down below and let me know if you enjoyed it, what you thought, what did you build, and will we be seeing you back? My build schedule is a little disjointed at the moment, I'm sorry, but I'll be revisiting the Hellcat display, plus I have something inbound you are simply not going to expect, although my Patreons already know what that is. Speaking of the Patreon community, many of them were building along with me over the weekend. We are building a tight, amazing community there, and it's a great way to get in touch with me, and I can help you through any modeling challenges you might have. It will improve your modeling, I absolutely guarantee it. But thanks for watching along here, guys. I couldn't do it without your support. I really appreciate it. And remember, guys, this is the greatest hobby in the world. Share it with your family and share it with your friends, and let's be proud of what we do. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
need some more coffee.